Good afternoon and good evening. It's going on evening. It's 4:54 p.m. It's Sunday, January 26th. We've been doing keynotes all day. I'm going to do only a few more, and then we'll see how much I have left for tomorrow. But we will finish by tomorrow. Then I can move on. Il m'en reste quasiment plus, là. On va faire une coupe encore, puis après ça, le reste, ça va aller demain. On va finir par demain. Ça va être super cool, je peux montrer autre chose. Bon, on continue. C'est quoi cette keynote-là? C'est keynote avec L'Oréal et d'autres personnes. On va regarder ça. Ça va être bien intéressant, je suis sûr. C'est tout intéressant. Je suis juste fatigué, là. Here we go. Oh, I'm just tired. Okay, let's focus. Here we go.
Good morning, everyone. Hopefully you're having a good CES. It's always a crazy time here. My voice is about to be shot, so hopefully I'll be fine, but I got my water, so we're all good. This session is called Adapting to Change, Demographic Shifts in Advertising, and I have a very esteemed panel with us here today. Let me just do some brief introductions for them. So to my left here, we have Kristen Reitzel, who's SVP of Marketing and Communications at Jackson Family Wines. No wines today, though, right?
No.
Okay, all right. And sitting next to Kristen is Han Wen, who's the Chief Digital and Marketing Officer for L'Oréal. And then at the very end, we have Marta Bowles, who's the Chief Communications Officer and Head of Global Marketing for Nielsen IQ. So great panel today. What we expect to cover today is talk a little bit just around what's going on in the market and the demographic shifts that we're seeing, and how some really unique consumer-based brands are tackling that and figuring that out. So with that, let me get started. What's the thesis here that we're thinking about? You know, there's been a lot of changes over the past several years, right? There's generational changes. There has been tech changes. All of a sudden, within the past few years, it's all around CDPs and media networks. COVID has changed our behaviors and how we engage with media and engage with each other. There's cultural changes, so there's just a lot of changes that we're all sort of like grappling with. And I have to look at my notes, but we had some insights that we've uncovered, and I think Marta, you guys as well. And just to sort of put a fine point on this, 30% of Gen Z, millennials believe that AI content is more relevant to them than non-AI content. And that's really around this personalization aspect, versus 20% of Xers and Boomers. 60% of Z and millennials also believe fandom and influencers, like we all know this, fandom and influencers help influence product, but also helps them with their media choices and what media they engage with and how to engage with it. And then also really interesting was that in the big generational shift is sort of in identity, and a good example of this is in social. About 2.4 different personas that a Gen Z and a millennial will have online, very different than Xers and Boomers, who typically will only have one and barely be able to manage that well. So those are some of the research that we've uncovered, but I know, Marta, you guys have done some really interesting research.
Yeah, and we know that we did a study that came out at the end of last year about Generation Z or Z, and we called it Spend Z. And the reason why we called it that is it's going to be the largest generation. But what's so significant about them is that they're going to be spending more than any previous generation to them. And they're already, Gen Zers here in the US are making almost 2x what Boomers made at the same age. And they are also the most digitally native. So I would actually call it channel agnostic, and building, Mark, on what you said. So these seamlessly go between channels. They may start on, or we call them phygital. They may start in a physical channel and then move into purchase something online or through social. And so therefore, they're going to be resetting kind of the tone. The other piece that's super critical about Gen Z that I think is really starting to influence a lot of us is how much values matter, and they're very individualistic. This is also going to be the most diverse population, so diversity is going to be, and cultural relevance will be super important. And so a lot to come. And when you think about it, we're projecting spend to be over $12 trillion by this generation by 2030. So when you think about 2025, there's already 8 to 9 trillion heading our way. So just understanding what motivates and how to be relevant to this new generation is going to be super important through advertising and how we market to them.
I'd love to hear from you, Kristen and you, Han, how you guys are seeing this sort of impacting in your business, and what sort of like insights are you sort of grappling with within that?
Yeah, so in the wine industry, we were very much a brick and mortar is the way we're going to drive consumer acquisition, retain our consumers. And so what we're seeing at the younger generation, they're much more empowered, they're much more informed, which is actually really helpful for the wine industry, because wine can be complicated. You know, stylistically, things can be different. You may love Chardonnay. It comes in like 40 different styles, depending on the winemaker's preference. So that's the beauty of wine and the artistry of wine, but it's also something that can get a little overwhelming quickly. So we're seeing the young, like millennials are consuming more than their previous 30-something-year-olds, and we love seeing that, but we're also seeing 20-somethings and younger 30-somethings coming into the category, just much more empowered and informed. I think that has a lot to do with they have so much more information at their fingertips, and so they're entering the category in a much different way, but that doesn't mean they don't want to lose that allure and that kind of magic that the wine industry has. But we had to really, I would call digitizing the wine industry is a really important way that we're going to stay relevant in the alc bev space. And the wine industry's consumer in that space is the most digitally influenced. And I think that's because there's so much discovery and exploration to do. But we can't rely just on brick and mortar anymore. And so that physical to digital, you know, we may have 80% of, you know, our wine club members come in through the physical location, but they're with us in a digital way throughout most of their lifetime with us. And so we needed to make sure we were continuing to match that. And so what we've been doing is not just upgrading our back end and the actual tech, but you know, just getting to know our customers better, serving them better content. But I think that, yeah, they're digital natives. They want more personalization. They're coming in more informed and empowered. So taking advantage of that while also just ensuring that we're keeping up is going to be really important for the wine industry to stay ahead.
Well, I'm very fortunate to be a part of an organization that covers every category and every part of a consumer's beauty need. So we have 30 plus brands, and we've actually started to shift our thinking around what does that really mean, and that shift really meant going from beauty for all to beauty for each. And it also means that we spend an enormous amount of time trying to understand what is the individual's consumer need for beauty across the entire category, from hair to skin to nails, anything that you can think of. And so when we look at the US population right now at this moment, what we see is something that is unprecedented, at least in my time, which is that if you remove, let's say, the alphas, right, who are too young, they're too young for us to be targeting, what we see is actually a very even generational split between Gen Z, millennials, X, and boomers, almost entirely 20% across the board. And that actually means that we need to go one step deeper into understanding, and it's not enough to just say, well, what does Gen Z want? What does millennials want? Because what we realize is the functional needs from the product, the emotional needs from the beauty product look very, very different. And I'll give you an example. So when we speak to an older beauty consumer, somebody who is a boomer, what we realize is that they feel very often underrepresented when they're being spoken to by the beauty industry, and their needs have dramatically changed, you know. And I think, you know, somebody who is hitting 60, 65, 70 today feels very differently than 20 years ago, and they actually want to see themselves represented. They also want to see their needs represented, and they have this great deal of emotional need around, I would say, things like acceptance and nostalgia. When we speak to a younger consumer that is Gen Z or millennial, what we see is that they really love the aesthetic, right? And they really want to have joy and fun from the product on top of whatever it is that your product is doing for them. And actually, this creates a great challenge for marketers, right? For all of those amazing people that work at L'Oreal across my 30 plus brands, to say, how do we speak to these individuals, really at the individual level, knowing what their emotional and functional needs are, and knowing how they vary over time. It's an incredible challenge, but it's also really fun.
It's awesome. Let me dive in a little deeper on that. Like, there's a lot of noise in the market, right? What kind of strategies are you employing to sort of reach those audiences and engage with those audiences, beyond, like, maybe a little bit more specifically, are you bridging physical and digital? I know L'Oreal's doing a lot of interesting things around that. Like, how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, this is a question that we ask ourselves, at the start of the e-commerce age. I think we're starting to think about channels not really in the sense of online, offline, or digital, phygital. We really think of it as a single channel. I think we are very channel agnostic at this point. And it's actually a privilege to be able to say that, because during COVID, if you did not live online, you didn't live at all. And what we realize is that you need that consumer to be engaged with you across the board. The omni-channel shopper is incredibly important. When we look at beauty specifically, what we see is that 5 years ago, roughly about 10% of beauty customers were omni-channel. Now it's half, right? And so this is the moment where we really start to think like, okay, you're not an online shopper or a physical store shopper. But what we also realize is that omni-channel shopper is way more engaged in the category, much more interested in consuming the content that influencers are putting out, that our brands are putting out. And they're a lot more discerning, right? They don't want to just see the awareness ad to say, hey, I'm this brand and I want to talk to you about this product. They're very deep into the ingredient story. They're very deep into your mission. They're very deep into why. Why do I need to buy this product? Why do I need to buy it again? And that also creates more touch points that we need to make sure that we're present in, so that we're telling these stories about our brands.
Awesome. And to follow up with you on that, it's a real challenge, because wine is something to be experienced, not just consumed. And how do you do that?
And I mean, if you look at the number one driver of purchase in the wine industry, not surprisingly, is taste and style. And so when you have to think about that, trial is such an important aspect, and we jokingly call it like sips to lips, and it's a really important thing. So what we do, and I love the kind of the agnostic channel approach, because it's the same thing. Our highest value customers, the highest retention, our most engaged, biggest purchasers, they're buying and engaging they're buying across, physical stores. When you have to think about that, trial is such an important aspect, and we jokingly call it like sips to lips, and you have to purchase.
And how do you do that?
And I mean, if you look at the number one driver of purchase in the wine industry, not surprisingly, is taste and style. And so when you have to think about that, trial is such an important aspect, and we jokingly call it like sips to lips, and it's a really important thing. So what we do, and I love the kind of the agnostic channel approach, because it's the same thing. Our highest value customers, the highest retention, our most engaged, biggest purchasers, they're buying and engaging they're buying across, physical stores, restaurants, online with us, but they're also engaging in all of our content. And so we suspected that, and then when we put the tools in place to actually start measuring that and tracking that, we realized we needed to create a rich environment for them to find that content that they wanted, to engage with us in all these different places we knew they were. And with the wine industry, that's just not our tasting rooms and our websites, but that's also in restaurants and in retail for the most part. But I mean, the one thing I will say is events are still extremely important. And so a lot of our brands, like getting on the road with our La Crema winery, which has been around over 40 years now, and keeping that relevant, has very much been going out into the market, going to events that aren't wine events, going to music festivals and showing up in places I don't think typically people might see wine, and doing it in a way that is thoughtful. You're not just another alcohol beverage at the bar. Like you have a presence, you're branding yourself, you're almost creating a mobile tasting room. And when we did that in our first year, we went to 14 markets. We sampled 50,000 people on the La Crema products. 12% of those people converted to, regular customers of ours, wine club members. But I think it's interesting, our tasting room only can see 8,000 to 10,000 people a year.
And they have to fly out to
and you have to fly to wine country. Right. And that is a very big ask of a consumer, where La Crema is everywhere. And if you can find that everywhere, making your consumer jump through these hurdles just to experience that, you're gonna see a decline in that acquisition. So going out, that was a big part of that. So physically being places for trial still is very important to the wine industry. It just doesn't have to happen in the one place you are with the vineyard behind you. And I think that realization, it's an investment, but I think it's an important one. But then matching that with a digital journey. And that's where I think it's really important that your consumer is in all these places, and they want to see you in all these places. And if they're a super fan, they're gonna come along with you. And so to not be there for them and to not engage with them in a place that they want to find you, I think is just a missed opportunity for a lot of brands. And so we've been taking that on much more seriously and just making sure we are in all those places we know our consumers want us to be.
Marta, I'm curious from Nielsen's kind of perspective here. You know, we're talking to the beverage industry, we're talking to the beauty industry, talking a lot around sort of getting out of traditional media and back into more physical media. I'm curious though, in the world of personalization and how like we still have to address different audiences. There's different core buyers and different needs and same product. I'm wondering what you guys are seeing or thinking and what kind of advice you guys have.
There is, and one of the things that we actually focus on, and I'll kind of highlight, I'll have to use my cheat sheet because it has a lot of details, but we at NIQ have a number of neuroscientists, and we combine that with survey data and talking to consumers to understand like what matters to them. And it really kind of builds on that point that in some ways sometimes you have the like 20%, 20%, 20%. Culturally, as well as kind of geographically and generationally, there are some things that are kind of universal. So we are very human, and we're more similar at times than we think we are. So some of the things that they determine about the conscious and the unconscious, of what drives memorability is being human. And then it's more about where we're the same is in our emotional responses, no matter where you are, because we're programmed that your brain thinks the same way. Drivers of attention. So if you're watching an advertising, all of us will see something happening on the side, something's blinking, so we kind of process that information the same. Fundamental sensory pieces are the same. And the other part that I thought was super interesting was patterns. We make connections by following patterns, and that is actually universal, generational, and global. Where we become different is those cultural relevant areas of where it becomes a bit different and where you need to kind of be specific in what you're trying to achieve, whether it's a demographic like a generation or it's something like a lifestyle. So people who want protein, people who want clean. And so that's where it becomes about social relationship cues, more about body language, how it's perceived, humor. And that could actually be cultural and generational, different metaphors. And so what happens is when you can make things relatable, it sparks deeper memory engagement. So people will remember the brand and that almost experience of what they saw. And if it doesn't connect in that way, they kind of forget. It's almost blank. So what we're advising a lot of our clients on is how do you make sure you're relevant and relatable? Because what it does is automatically ignites some of the brain activities to have. So when you're trying to personalize, they hear the message versus and hear or see it on a package or see it in advertising. So better understanding that.
Han, beauty is such a personal thing for an individual, and the standards of beauty have changed and widened and differentiated over time. I'm curious how you guys are starting to think about that in terms of like really addressing everybody's individual need and answering their own personal sort of style and beauty definition.
Yeah, I think we, you know, we're a company that has been around for 115 years. We've seen the evolution of identity and evolution of what beauty means in terms of community building, identity building. And I think our philosophy has always been that whatever your beauty needs are, whoever you want to be, this is part of that journey to become that. And we're there for you if you need us, and if you don't, then you don't, right? And so we think about this in the sense of, for example, if you're coming, you know, kind of out of school for the first time and you need to look a specific way because you have your first big corporate job and you want to make sure that, you know, you're on point on your first day of your job. We have, you know, we have all of that, and we can actually have a lot of different brands and products and a lot of educational content that helps to guide you through that. You know, if you're a woman that is going through menopause, right, and you feel that my skin is changing, my hair is changing, my body is changing, how do I make sure that I still have that inner sense of confidence? We also have a ton of content and brands and formulations that are very specifically addressed to those life phases. So it's really interesting, you know, what the point that you just made about relevance, right? I think in the current age, what we realize is that it's less about what the brand wants to say, and it's more about what the consumer chooses, to engage with and what is the content that they want to engage with. And that really means that instead of producing maybe one hero asset and trying to push it out into as many different mediums as possible, what we do is now a lot of testing and experimentation. And we do a lot of risk taking actually relative to what we were doing 10, 20 years ago, which is to say, hey, you know, this is the way that consumers want to see and hear brands and products being talked about. Maybe it even makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable. Maybe it's somebody who is, you know, slapping product on in a garage, but that's okay. Let's do that. Let's make it fun. Let's make it engaging. Let's make it relevant. Let's make it contextual to what is going on in their lives. And we found that actually these type of activations and the creative concepts that come about, the ones that make us feel slightly uncomfortable because we want to be serious and we want to be, you know, like we have all these researchers and a lot of PhDs who are doing our formulas. Those are the ones who actually engage the best. Right. And then when we get that immediate feedback in the comment section that says like, oh my God, this is an amazing piece of advertising. I really would watch this again. I don't know if any of you saw the Michael Cera Super Bowl ad that was very hotly debated and saying like, wait, what does Michael Cera have to do with dermatologists? But in the end, the comments really reinforced this belief that if you make the message relevant, right, if you really engage with the person, make them laugh, and you make them kind of pause for a moment, everything else will follow. They will realize, yes, okay, your product actually has ceramides, highest concentration of ceramides. This is the best thing that you can do for your skin. That follows, right, as soon as you engage their attention.
Yeah.
I'm curious, just as a follow-up on that, have you guys, what has changed in, let's say, the past 3-4 years for you guys around whether it's you're thinking differently around segmentation, you're thinking differently around how you're producing content? You talked about you produce a lot of different pieces, not just a hero asset, right? Well, what are some of the big shifts that you guys have gone through that you're continuing to go through?
There's like, I think one overriding obsession that keeps me up at night, and we talk a lot about internally, which is how do we stand out in the sea of sameness? I mean, I've literally woken up at 3 o'clock in the morning and thought about this. And I think that one thought keeps us from doing things that have been done before. And we really try to think about how we can differentiate. We know our products are amazing. We know that we have a lot of research that goes into every formulation. And then it's up to the marketer's job to be able to tell that story. And so what has changed in the last 3 years is not around just pushing the message out, but it's about rising above the sea of sameness. How do I speak to you in a different way than I speak to you? And that really means that we become experimenters, right? We're not creatives, marketers. We produce things. I'm at this point where I tell my team, if you're not producing or testing 10 different creative concepts a day, then what are you doing, right? Mm-hmm. And it doesn't need to be beautiful. It doesn't need to be polished. It would be nice, but what we should do is to actually put a lot of things in market, see what resonates with who, and then make sure that we double down on those messages.
And for Kristen, what I find interesting is that the whole wine business also has changed over the past few years, and new product models, new even differentiation in terms of like very hyper segmented product development, but also some of the business models with subscription and stuff. I'm wondering how you guys are thinking about that relative to different generations and different demographics.
Yeah, I think what the wine industry likes to take itself very seriously. I didn't start in the wine industry, so I'm the questions asker. Like, why do we do it this way? Like, oh, this is what the consumer wants.
It's always been done
based on what? And I think it's interesting because I came in a fan of wine. I came in a passionate, drinker of wine, and it was so serious when I got there. And I was just like, you do realize it's alcohol, and it's like it's usually used in celebration and all these wonderful times of our life, or just sitting down with a friend and catching up, or like you had a long day and it helps you unwind. So I found it really interesting that we were trying to take ourselves so seriously, even in the commercial brand area, and it just didn't seem. And it was the suspicion I had. I was like, I don't know that this is exactly what the consumer wants. And it was this idea of, yeah, it's about the brand and what we want to say about ourselves, not necessarily what maybe the consumer finds interesting. And it was pushing them down a very formulaic path. And you better like it. because we like it, and that's what we want to be known as. And I agree, like testing is where we started. It was like, can we just try? Can we actually think about letting there be more creative freedom and seeing what sticks? And a lot of those suspicions were confirmed. We don't need to be this serious. Like wine is very serious. It's very hard to make. You know, there's a lot that goes into it. It's an agricultural product. It's culture. It's been around thousands of years. But it's also meant to be enjoyed and celebrated and entertaining and all of that. But, you know, you look at subscriptions, wine club, right? We've been doing wine clubs for years. It's kind of, you know, something we felt really comfortable in, but we haven't modernized that in a long time. And I think as the consumer expectation and the adoption of subscriptions outside of the wine industry and other industries came into play, we really had to reconcile with the fact that we are once again in this model of the wine club, forcing the consumer down a certain path. This is the wine you're getting. I don't want to hear anything about it. I don't care if you don't like it. And it wasn't that it wasn't that bad, but it was hard to, you know, play around with your subscription. You didn't have a lot of flexibility. And so we actually worked with Deloitte on this, but we decided, okay, we need to do something where there's customization, there's ability to add, swap, change. And it just kind of, it put the consumer that wanted to be in the driver's seat in that driver's seat. And there was always these questions, right? Of like, oh, they're gonna like skip their shipment or they're not gonna buy as much. And what's interesting is we actually have seen on the brands that we've introduced this new subscription model to, we've seen a 27% increase in average order value per shipment. We've seen that our online wine club sign up, because now it's all online and all that information is available if you want to find it. We're putting it front and center so people don't have to go hunting for this information. Our online signups was about 4%, and now we're seeing that arching up into 23%, 24% as of few weeks ago on the brands that have done it. And I think something as simple as that, like we had a subscription business, but it was very cumbersome. It had a lot of friction, and it was forcing the customer the way we wanted them to operate. Yeah, and I think that's it. And then also just, I mean, we are investing so much more in digital marketing. When I came in, it was about 8% of the digital or the marketing budget. Now it's about 40. And so I think that it just, our consumers are in that space. And so doing more testing, doing more segmentation, actually looking at our customers' behavior and their purchase behavior, you know, using our own first-party data and third-party data and realizing those are the same customer, and doing a better job of talking to them about the things they want to talk about. Because like I said with wine, not everyone, like I'm not a big fan of Pinot Noir. So please don't talk to me about that all day. And you know that about me because I've never purchased it from you. So I think it's one of those things where I'm like, I gave you this information. Please use it and use it wisely so that I don't want to just kind of push you aside because you're just serving me with irrelevant content. And that was a symptom the wine industry definitely is improving on more and more and more. And it's a huge priority for our team at Jackson Family Wines is to just continue to do that across every brand. And we are in the process of basically doing that across all 40 wineries at this point. We're about halfway there, so.
I think for both of you, one of the things that strikes me talking about, you both have products that are relevant to different segments. Mm-hmm. You're on the marketing side of it, but product development is such a big part of it, and they're all long tail. I'm assuming beauty is a long tail development cycle, wine certainly is a long tail. But how are you starting to think about product and what's marketing's role in sort of influencing whether it's new products, new packaging, right, how are you feeding back into the development to address all these shifts in the market? Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I mean, we actually have a two-pronged approach. So we have kind of a work stream that is really focused around fast beauty, a development cycle that goes very quickly because, a lot of, especially in color cosmetics, it's very trend-based, and so you have to move very, very quickly. So, I mean, the difference between when, Cappuccino I was in and out was like a matter of 6 weeks. And the nice thing about it is that a lot of these times, these are looks oriented, and that it's really more about the artistry of how you compose that look. So it's not necessarily the case that we have to come out with a new shade. It's really about putting it together. And then on the longer development front, we have, a lot of our teams or of our resources are devoted towards research and innovation. And beauty is also a category that is very supply side driven, which means that when we come out with a new ingredient that says, hey, this is the latest and greatest ingredient that is going to address acne. This is the latest ingredient that is going to address dandruff, which we, by the way, just launched the most phenomenal dandruff product right now.
Want to give a plug?
Check it out, CeraVe. Go check out our new hairline. is that we tell that story to the consumer to say, we actually spent a lot of time, and this is not something that I can just like snap my fingers, and also above my pay grade, right? Real scientists working at this. And so we think about this in really two speeds, right? Which is, what do you want? What do you need right now? What are trend-based things that we can cater to? But then what also takes a very long time, in the sense that there's real research, there's real innovation. And when we're very fortunate to have, we think about our product roadmap, and I look at the year ahead. I'm very, very excited to see all of the innovation that we're about to bring into the market from a beauty perspective in 2025. And then it becomes the marketer's job to say, don't miss the opportunity to tell the story, to tell this amazing story of what our scientists have produced, and tell that story to each person in the way that's relevant to them. So it's a big task, a big burden, but I think we're actually doing okay. We're doing a good job of being able to say to each individual consumer, in a way that is, this is your beauty need, and we have something for you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for us, there's a lot of different wine out in the world. So we focus on what we have and kind of what's in our backyard. We are very lucky that we own our vineyards. And so from a supply perspective, we are able to pivot quickly if we feel that, okay, we want to introduce a Cabernet to this brand. So that is something, it's about keeping up with opportunities. La Crema, for example, just launched its first Cabernet Sauvignon, historically always a Pinot Noir and Chardonnay brand. A lot of people probably didn't expect that, just because it's kind of outside of our core varieties, but doing extremely well. We launched a Sauvignon Blanc a few years ago. It was one of the fastest moving products in that brand. And I think that's where you have to know your consumer. And so I look at La Crema and I'm like, that consumer loves the brand La Crema. They trust us. Anything we probably introduce, if we feel that customer base is hungry for Sauvignon Blanc, which is now really hot again, and people are clamoring for more Sauvignon Blanc, we wish we could make more. Need to develop some more vineyards, which takes a long time. But it's one of those things too. It's like, don't be nervous about introducing something just because you feel like, oh well, the brand wasn't founded on that. And you have to really let your consumers also help guide some of that decision making. And then Kendall Jackson, which is, we've had the #1 selling wine in America for over 30 years now, and that's our Kendall Jackson Vintners Reserve Chardonnay. We actually took that from cork to screw cap, which was a very shocking decision for many of my colleagues in the wine industry. And there's this, there's a perception that, screw cap is a cheaper alternative to cork, or it means it's a quality driver. And we put a lot of information out there, and we basically said, this is why. One, we're extremely climate minded, sustainably minded company. We do a lot of climate action work, and we knew it was, possibly it was a better, not just sustainability decision, but we also thought like freshness, ease of access. This is something most people buy, drink within a week. People want to be able to just make that an easier experience. But it took a lot of education, because when you take the #1 selling product and you change a major aspect of it, you better be prepared for that storytelling. And the consumer came along with us. We definitely had a lot of people wanting to understand why, but as soon as they realized that was still their favorite wine, it was okay. But I think things like that, you just can't be nervous. I don't think 20 years ago, Kendall Jackson would have considered launching a low calorie and a low alcohol segment, and we did that. And what I love about that is when we introduce these new products, it's doing really well. But I think it was the latest data showed us it was like almost half those buyers were new to Kendall Jackson. Right. And so it's also an opportunity. We're meeting a consumer need. We saw the trend. We did our research. We realized this is something that consumers are wanting. The distributors are wanting it. Retailers are wanting it. Kendall Jackson is that, America's brand of wine. Why wouldn't we do that? And then I love when it also gets people into the franchise. And I'm like, well, now that you've seen we can do this well, when you're reaching for that, maybe try Kendall Jackson. And we see that. We see consumers then start kind of experimenting and playing around within our whole portfolio. And so I just think don't get nervous about it, but make sure there's a why there. And I think that's the difference between taking advantage of the change in consumer demand and like what they're asking for, be it, low calorie, no alcohol is very much something we're looking at as well. But just be prepared to make it make sense for you, and don't compromise that. And so we reconcile that a lot. We're lightweighting a lot of our glass for environmental reasons. We moved from wood boxes to more recyclable on our high end, which some of our wines we sell for $300 to $500 a bottle. A lot of people are like, "What? You're getting rid of the wood box? It's not luxury anymore." And I'm like, "But this is part of our core values." And so, yeah, I think sometimes it's got to be about you. Other times it's got to be about the consumer, but just make sure it makes sense. And so
I want to follow up on the low alcohol and some of the disruption in a second, and also some of the disruption happening in the beauty industry. But Marta, How
values. The wood box itself for a lot makes sense for you, and don't like that's the difference between taking advantage of the change in consumer demand and like what they're asking for, be it low calorie, no alcohol is very much something we're looking at as well. But just be prepared to make it make sense for you and don't compromise that. And so we reconciled that a lot. We're lightweighting a lot of our glass for environmental reasons. We moved from wood boxes to more recyclable on our high end, which some of our wines we sell for $300 to $500 a bottle. A lot of people were like, "What? You're getting rid of the wood box? It's not luxury anymore." And I'm like, "But this is part of our core values." And so, yeah, I think sometimes it's got to be about you. Other times it's got to be about the consumer, but just make sure it makes sense. And so
I want to follow up on the low alcohol and some of the disruption in a second, and also some of the disruption happening in the beauty industry. But Marta, what would you give advice to marketers in thinking about, like, the example of going from cork to screw cap, and the angle is that it's actually the cultural shift happening of sustainability, and that's a good, like, what advice do you give to marketers how to think about taking these risks, but calculating them in a way, and what do they need to do to help convince?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the one shift that has happened, I think, we did this study and we talked about sustainability. And for Gen Xers and Boomers, it was more about like recyclable packaging. For millennials and Gen Zers, it was really more about social responsibility. And I think it's all kind of converging. So this awareness and this idea of inclusion and social and being pro-social, I think that is probably the shift, because when you listened to this conversation going on, it's really about what the consumer's driving it. Because before, it used to be about the brand driving it. I'm going to tell you about who I am, and either you're going to buy me or not. Now, it's actually consumers want brands to drive cultural change, but they want to be like, that's where they reward them, because you're reflecting what they believe in. And we talk about this thing called say do. So what consumers say and what they do aren't always the same. But what it starts to do is kind of building on this wine example of identify white space opportunities. Because what happens is consumers are saying they want to find ways to be eco-friendly. They want to find ways to be and they're going to reward the brands that are doing that. And so if you can really identify, and that's what Jackson Wines sounds like they're doing, is that they're finding those white space opportunities to make sure that that's how they can actually incrementalize and bring more different consumers in, versus I'll call myself a true wine loyalist. I definitely like the wood box and the cork. But on the flip side, I like the convenience. And so it's really being flexible and listening to the consumer and understanding where is the trend significant and where is it like additive? Because obviously innovation is very expensive. So it's like, where's the size of the prize? And I think understanding that say do is also really important.
Yeah.
Okay. So we have time for probably 2 more questions, but I'm going to ask this one. A little bit off script, but it's a safe question, don't worry. There's a lot of interesting disruptive changes happening in both of your industries. We're in dry January. I was just at a bar last night and they were offering no Gronies.
What's
Tasted
that?
like iced tea. I know, exactly, right? But there's a growing trend, particularly among Zs and Xers Zs and I knew I was going to do the Xer thing. Zs and millennials of really drinking less, right? In the beauty category, there's a similar trend of like not so much of putting the face on and sort of trying to be more natural. So I'm curious, those are very highly disruptive, not just to marketing, but to the core of the business that you have. As marketers, how are you thinking about influencing and driving your business, your organizations, to really figure out how to embrace those changes?
Yeah, I think it's definitely more of this health conscious approach to kind of that balanced lifestyle is what I would call it. And so interesting that, things like dry January, of course we look at that, like we're going to look at our research and be like, is this really affecting? There's always trends throughout the last, 100 years that you see ebbs and flows in any kind of alc bev space. Prohibition was a tough one for the alc space. So we're hoping not to go there again. For certain
industries.
Yeah, I was like, that was a little rough. Hopefully we don't have to do that again. But I think for the most part, I think wine is in a good spot in the alcohol beverage space because, it's an agricultural product. It is deemed you know, it's interesting. There's a perception amongst consumers, and we do, like when we do some consumer research, that like it is the healthier option of alcohol, probably because, and I'm not here to make any health claims, but I think it's like playing into those assumptions is also really smart for marketers, right? Like they're already being led to that water, you know, like let's not try to steer them any which way if they're already kind of like making these conclusions on their own, but they want options. And that's why I think we really considered the low calorie, low alcohol. We saw a more just health balanced lifestyle person that wanted to consume wine or, you know, play around in this category. And if you don't have any options for them, they're going to find it somewhere else, whether that's the beer industry or spirits or, you know, no gronies, which would be interesting. And it's
Tasting
things
like iced tea.
Oh, yeah, I was like, I would be really interested to try that. But I think that if there's those people that are sober curious and all of those things, like having options for them just made sense for us. And as long as we can get the quality there to a place where we're comfortable and putting our logo on it, then we're good with that. And I think, you know, it's been interesting. There's been a lot going on. I think if some people saw a recent article about Surgeon General warnings and things like that, those things have come, they have gone, some have stuck. There's a lot of talks around ingredient labeling in alcohol and particularly wine. So we're very engaged in those conversations. I think for us, it's like, please, you know, moderation, but like wine, it's a different consumable in the alc bev space. And so we definitely understand that about who we are. And, you know, we think it's about food, culture, friends, family, entertaining, celebration. And so we really try to like lean on that, but also have products available to those consumers that want to explore that. And we encourage it. We want to be available. We want to be there for all those people. And so, you know.
Even if that means going adjacent to the product.
Yeah, because we're still proud of it. We're still proud of what we put in the bottle. And we think Kendall Jackson has that place in the landscape of the US and international consumer. So like I said, kind of going back to if it makes sense for your brand, then move forward with it. And so we have 40 wineries worldwide. Not all of them are going to have a low or no alcohol option, but right now Kendall Jackson does, and we're looking at that potentially for La Crema, and it makes sense there.
Huh?
I'm still thinking about sober curious.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use that.
We got wine.
You would be.
There's California sober also, but we can't talk about that.
Oh yeah, that's a thing too. Yeah, we got a lot of funny things going on in California.
I mean, you'd be surprised to know how many products it takes to get the no makeup look. It's a lot. So I don't think that you know, for us, we don't really see downshifts in beauty consumption. What we see are actually shifts in terms of what the outcome is. Right. So instead of a fully made up look, a fully contoured look, there is more of a tendency and trend towards going upstream and thinking about health, whether it's scalp health, skin health in general. And that's good for us too. And we really love to nerd out around all of the different ingredients that it takes to actually get that inner glow from your skin. And on top, if you want to accentuate it with beauty and makeup, and of course, no one leaves the house without mascara. We're always there for that. So I don't really see beauty as being a category that is going to be impacted by any downward trend in terms of consumption. They're just shifts in terms of in the outcome.
Well, we're going to get the hook here. So I want to thank Marta, Han, Kristen for your participation here. I want to thank everyone here for listening, and enjoy your CES. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, that was very interesting. It was fun too. It was very educational. Bonjour tout le monde. C'était vraiment éducatif. C'était vraiment le fun en plus. C'était vraiment un bon panel. C'était un très bon keynote. Très, très, très bon keynote. Bon, je reviens dans 5 minutes avec un autre keynote. Il me reste pas beaucoup, mais je ne vais pas tout asseoir. Un ou deux encore, but that's it for tonight. So I'll come back in 5 minutes. I'll do 1 or 2 more, but that's it after that. The rest will have to wait till tomorrow. Thank you for joining. It was fun. It was a fun keynote. Quite interesting and fun. Okay, so let's continue. I'll be back in 5 minutes. Thank you for joining. Be right back.